Somewhere in the last few years, without a single dramatic moment marking the change, a lot of people quietly stopped finishing their own thoughts. Not because they became less capable of it, but because something faster was always sitting right there, ready to finish the thought for them before they'd even fully formed the question. I want to be honest with you about something most people don't want to hear because it's uncomfortable and because it implicates almost all of us to some degree. Relying on AI isn't neutral. It isn't simply a convenience with no cost attached. Every time you let something else do the thinking you were fully capable of doing yourself, something in you gets a little quieter, a little slower to engage, a little more dependent on being handed the answer instead of building it. This isn't a warning about some distant future. It's a description of something already happening in your own mind right now, and I want to walk you through exactly how it works, so you can actually see it instead of just feeling its effects without understanding them. Section 1. The brain follows a simple rule. There's a principle in how the brain works that's almost embarrassingly simple, and yet it explains nearly everything in this conversation. Whatever you use gets stronger, whatever you stop using gets weaker. This isn't a metaphor borrowed loosely from physical fitness, it's a fairly literal description of how cognitive function actually operates. The same underlying mechanism, whether we're talking about memory, reasoning, or creative problem solving. Every time you retrieve a memory instead of looking it up, you strengthen your ability to retrieve memories. Every time you work through a difficult problem instead of accepting a generated solution, you strengthen your ability to work through difficult problems. And every time you outsource one of these processes instead of engaging it, the opposite happens quietly without any dramatic symptom to alert you. The brain doesn't maintain capacities out of sentiment. It's ruthlessly efficient, and if a function isn't being used, it reallocates the resources elsewhere. This is exactly why the cost of constant reliance on AI isn't really about the AI at all. It's about what your own mind does in response to no longer being asked to do the work. Section 2. What happens to memory? Let's start with something concrete because this one is easy to observe if you're honest with yourself. There was a time when you had to actually hold information in your head, phone numbers, directions, facts you'd looked up recently, because nothing was going to remember it for you. That constant low-level exercise of retention wasn't separate from intelligence, it was part of it, a mind trained through regular use to hold and manipulate information internally. Now, an enormous amount of that function has been handed off, not just to AI specifically, but to the broader ecosystem of devices that remember so we don't have to. The result isn't that people have become forgetful in some obvious, alarming way. It's subtler than that. It's a growing discomfort with holding information in mind at all, a reflexive urge to look something up the instant it's needed rather than trusting your own retrieval first. Memory, like any other trained capacity, responds to demand. Remove the demand consistently enough and the capacity quietly recedes, not because you're incapable of it, but because it's no longer being asked to perform. Section 3. What happens to reasoning? This is the deeper cost, and it's harder to see because it doesn't announce itself the way forgetting a phone number does. Reasoning is a skill built entirely through friction, through the effortful process of working through an unclear problem toward a clear conclusion. Every time you skip that friction, by accepting a generated answer without working through the logic yourself, you get the conclusion without the exercise that would have strengthened your ability to reach conclusions independently next time. This creates a strange and genuinely dangerous pattern. You can accumulate more correct answers than ever before in your life while your actual reasoning ability quietly declines. Because accumulating answers and building the capacity to reason are not the same process, even though they can look identical from the outside. A person who has genuinely reasoned through 100 difficult problems is meaningfully different cognitively from a person who has simply received 100 correct answers, even if both of them currently know the same facts. The first person built a transferable capacity. The second person built a habit of dependency that only works as long as the answer-generating system remains available and accurate. Section 4. Struggle was never the enemy. Somewhere along the way, difficulty got rebranded as something to be eliminated as quickly as possible, and I understand the appeal. Struggle is genuinely uncomfortable. But there's a specific kind of struggle, the productive kind, that sits directly at the center of how real learning happens, and removing it doesn't make learning more efficient. It prevents learning from happening at all. When you wrestle with a problem before you get the answer, your brain is forming connections, testing possibilities, building the exact neural pathways that make future problems easier to solve. Skip straight to the answer and none of that formation happens. You've received information without building the underlying capacity that information was supposed to develop. This is why students who use AI to generate essays instead of working through the difficulty of forming their own argument often walk away with a finished product, but without the actual skill the assignment was designed to build. The product looks the same from the outside. The person holding it is not the same. Productive struggle was never the obstacle standing between you and growth. It was the actual mechanism of growth, and removing it removes the growth along with it, even while the immediate task still gets completed. Section 5. Feeling smarter while becoming less capable. Here's the part that makes this genuinely dangerous rather than simply unfortunate. Using AI regularly tends to make people feel more capable, not less, because they're producing more, faster, with polish that used to take real effort to achieve. That feeling is not an illusion exactly. Output has genuinely improved. But there's a gap quietly opening between the quality of what you're producing and the actual capability sitting underneath it. A gap that stays invisible right up until the moment the tool isn't available, or the situation requires reasoning through something genuinely novel that no generated answer already exists for. This is when the gap becomes painfully visible, in a live conversation with no time to check anything, in a crisis that requires real-time judgment. In any moment that demands the actual underlying capacity rather than the polished output that capacity used to produce. People are often shocked to discover in exactly these moments how much less confident and capable they feel operating on their own than they assumed. Because the confidence they'd been building was attached to the output, not to the underlying skill that used to generate it independently. Section 6. Using it without losing yourself to it. None of this means the answer is avoiding these tools entirely. That's neither realistic nor necessary, and frankly, it would cost you real advantages available to anyone willing to use them wisely. The actual answer is sequencing, doing your own thinking first, however rough, however incomplete, before you bring in outside assistance. So the tool is refining work your own mind already did rather than replacing work your mind never got the chance to attempt. It also means deliberately choosing certain areas of your thinking, certain skills you genuinely care about keeping sharp, and protecting those specifically from constant outsourcing. Exercising them the hard way on purpose, the same way someone might choose to walk instead of drive purely to keep their body capable of walking. Not everything needs to be done manually. That would be its own kind of foolishness. But something does deliberately and consistently, or the underlying capacity that makes you genuinely capable, not just capable of producing polished output, will continue quietly receding exactly the way any unused capacity does, whether you notice it happening or not. Closing, what you're actually protecting. The real question underneath all of this was never whether AI is good or bad. It's simply a tool, and tools are neutral in themselves. The real question is what you're willing to keep doing yourself on purpose, even when something faster is sitting right there offering to do it for you. Every time you choose the harder, slower path of your own thinking, you're not being inefficient. You're making a deposit into a capacity that compounds over years. The same way every shortcut you take is a quiet withdrawal from that same account. Nobody becomes less intelligent in a single dramatic moment. It happens the way most real losses happen, gradually, disguised the entire time as simply being efficient. Until one day the gap between what you can produce and what you can actually do on your own becomes impossible to ignore. The mind you have right now is still fully capable of growing sharper instead of quietly receding. That outcome was never in the hands of the technology. It was always and still is entirely in yours.